Now, how do we do it? How do we make this request for reasonable cause penalty abatement? I'm glad you stuck around to find out. You will need Form 843 for penalty abatement. Now, as I mentioned in episode 11, you can request first time penalty abatement in a hard way. This is the hard way. And as I mentioned earlier in this episode, reasonable cause is not something easy. Once you fill out Form 843,
Welcome to the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens podcast. Are you behind on taxes? Is the IRS threatening you or your business? Are you overwhelmed and confused about how to resolve your tax issues? Let's join Timalyn as she explains your options and how she may be able to help. Timalyn Bowens is America's favorite EA.
Hey family, we are back for episode 12. And as always, I'm excited about taxes, but I'm glad to have you here with me too. Last episode, we talked about IRS penalties, and it was part 1. We talked about first time abatement. This episode, we're going to talk about penalties and how to have them removed for reasonable cause. Now, you may be thinking, what is reasonable cause? It's when the IRS says, you know what, you have fallen on hard times. That does make sense. You weren't trying to avoid us, so we can waive this penalty. So, if you listen to episode 11, you know that abatement is true forgiveness. It's when we take an IRS penalty and it's wiped clean from your slate. You'll also remember that any interest accrued on that penalty when it's removed is going to be wiped clean as well. So while this isn't as easy to obtain as first time abatement, it's still worthwhile. All right. So this episode, we are going to talk about the 9 reasons that the IRS deems as being reasonable cause. We're also going to talk about the requirements for obtaining this, and I'm going to tell you how to claim reasonable cause for penalties if you stick around to the end. So first things first, what are the requirements for reasonable cause abatement? Remember, I gave you the secret sauce last episode. All you have to do to get rid of a penalty if you qualify for first time abatement. Well, if you don't qualify for first time abatement, you have to put a little bit more work in, right? So, number 1, you can't make this request for abatement via the phone, okay? It must be in writing. Number 2, timing is everything. If the IRS has a penalty on your account for 2018, the timing of your reasonable cause must match the tax year involved. So let's say that you got COVID during the pandemic, whether it be 2020, 2021, right? You have long COVID. So you haven't been able to work, make any income. Well, that may affect what you can pay today, but it's not going to necessarily affect a penalty from 2018 because the timing's off. So your reasonable cause for a 2018 penalty has to be something that actually happened during 2018. Number 3, this is the last requirement. Just like anything else, the IRS is not giving you a free pass or free money. You have to have supporting documentation. You can't say, well, I think this happened, that happened. Yeah, they're going to laugh and say, ma'am or sir, please get off my phone. We're not helping you with this because you were supposed to send it in writing anyway. All right, so we've got to make sure that the request is in writing. We want to make sure that the timing matches. So whatever your reasonable cause is, it actually matches the time of the penalty being assessed. And then number 3, you want to make sure that you have supporting documentation. Now, I'm going to give you the 9 reasons that the IRS deems as okay for why they would remove this penalty. Keep in mind that with each of these reasons, if you're like, oh, I qualify for that, I want you to think, Where is my supporting documentation? Okay. Supporting documentation from a third party is always going to be best, not something you've written up yourself. You also want to think, did this actually happen in the same tax period where this penalty is assessed? Remember, having COVID in 2020, 2021 sucks, but it's not going to be good enough to get a penalty from 2018 removed. Also remember, do not waste your time waiting on the telephone to speak with an IRS agent if you are requesting reasonable cause penalty abatement. It must be in writing. So, reasonable cause number 1, death, serious illness, and unavoidable absence. What does this look like? Let's say we have 2 married taxpayers, right? And one of the spouses, they transitions. They're no longer here with us. Due to that death, let's say the other spouse experienced extreme grief and didn't get the taxes filed on time. They actually didn't get 2 years worth of taxes filed on time. You would be able, with reasonable cause, be able to submit a request that the failure to file penalty be removed due to death. You would want to make sure that you have something like the death certificate, which is going to substantiate that the other spouse died in that tax period. Because remember, timing is everything. Serious illness would be something that is terminal. And then unavoidable absence, we have those when I've had clients who were contracted to work overseas and it just wasn't possible to get them done. Or if we have somebody that becomes incarcerated, you don't really have an option a lot of times as to whether or not you're going to go with the police to be incarcerated. All right. So those are some of the things that qualify for reasonable cause number 1, death, serious illness, and unavoidable absence. Number 2, fire, casualty, or natural disaster. Now, with this, it can be a little tricky. You will probably remember from previous episodes I've told you, your definition of broke and I can't pay isn't the same as the IRS definition of broke and I cannot pay. When we're looking at natural disasters, it typically has to be something that was federally defined or declared as a natural disaster. I'll give you an example. At the end of 2021, y'all remember I'm in Kentucky. Western Kentucky was hit so hard with tornado, right? People lost their homes, people lost family members. Those people in Western Kentucky were given an extension to file their tax return. If for whatever reason they couldn't get the information to file the return due to the natural disaster, that's something that we have documentation of. We have where it was federally declared a natural disaster. That would qualify for number 2, reasonable cause under fire, casualty, or natural disaster. Number 3, unable to obtain records. I want you to pay very, very, very close attention. This means that it's almost impossible for you to obtain records. It doesn't mean that you ran everything through your bank account and you didn't want to use QuickBooks and you didn't keep track of your receipts. You have to still do your due diligence, okay? So if you're unable to obtain records, a reason that I've been able to get abatement qualified under number 3 is a situation where we had business partners, all right? And typically when you have a partnership, one person usually handles back office stuff, the other handles front office stuff. In those type of situations, if there's an ugly split between the partners, the partner that handled the administrative task typically is the only one that knows, 1, what those things mean, and 2, where they are. If something like that happened to you, that could qualify for being unable to obtain records. Same thing if we have a situation where An employer did not actually file your W-2s, so you have no idea how much you actually made, which I hope you have an idea, but you know what I mean. All of the details, so you couldn't file. Or if you have a situation in a marriage where it's split and you can't get your records to file, those would be valid reasons for number 3. Number 4, a mistake was made. Now, this is a little tricky because, yes, the IRS is made up of human beings like me and you, but it's a little difficult when you want penalties to be abated to prove that a mistake was made. All right, because you have to remember, you have to have supporting documentation as well. Number 5, erroneous advice. This means you did do your due diligence, but as a result of listening to a paid professional, these penalties were caused. I am going to get off my soapbox here in a minute, but keep in mind, everybody you listen to on the internet is not going to be the professional you want to listen to. All right. Now you may be thinking, well, Timalyn, I'm listening to you on the internet. Yes, and I'm more than happy to show my credentials. I've shown you where you can look me up on the IRS website. I can give you client testimonials. Think about this. When you are listening to your favorite celebrity and they are telling you different tax plans and strategies, the person telling you about those plans and strategies don't actually implement them. Have you ever played the game of telephone in school? And you know when you tell the message to one person, then it gets to the next person and the next person. When it comes full circle, the message is completely different. Yeah, that's what's happening on social media right now. Now, maybe they do have sketchy professionals. I don't know. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just letting you know that when a tax professional tells a taxpayer part of the tax law, when they interpret it and share it, it doesn't always come out the same. So be mindful of erroneous advice, whether it be on the internet or from your own tax professional. Always do your own research. As I've mentioned before, irs.gov is an amazing resource. Number 6, we have written or verbal advice from the IRS. Yes, this is tricky too. Every time I speak with the IRS, I take notes. I make sure that I have the ID number of the agent I'm speaking with. If it's an agent, if I'm dealing with an officer, I have that number. I make sure I have the time and date, because if you've ever spoken with the IRS before, you may be wondering, are they recording this? Well, guess what? Help them find a recording by having all that information written out, just in case you do need to go back and say, hey, you actually told me I was okay here, and then 3 months later you get hit with a penalty. Again, that one's going to be a little trickier to actually win successfully, because you are going to have to show supporting documentation, all right, and have the timing. So make sure you're taking excellent notes whenever you speak with the IRS. Now, if you have a professional handling the case for you, stepped in your shoes, similar to what I do with my clients when I do the representation piece, we keep those notes for you. Number 7, we have ignorance of the laws. Oh, my friend, if we're being technical, anybody could claim ignorance of the tax law, right? But again, they're looking at whether or not you did your due diligence. I've had taxpayers come to me and tell me they didn't know the tax deadline. And y'all know what? It's been the same, I believe, if not the 50s, since the 70s. So that really isn't going to fly. And if anything, during our COVID era, the deadline has been pushed back. So it worked to your benefit. So ignorance of the laws doesn't work for things like that are what we consider common knowledge. Ignorance of the law would be If something drastically changed, which we have had a lot of revisions, but ignorance of the law, I usually see passed or accepted, I should say, when it is included with the erroneous advice. Number 8 and number 9 are very similar, but number 8 is reasonable cause after you've done your ordinary care. So maybe something popped up, you've done all your due diligence, and you would be able to show the IRS maybe, you made a genuine mistake and you were doing everything you could to be compliant, but you're a human being. You made the mistake. Again, they're not out to ruin your life. They will if you don't communicate, but that is only if you don't communicate. Number 9, in which I hear a lot, this is actually difficult to get past. With undue financial hardship, usually we see they'll negotiate with that, but not actually abate the penalty, but it is listed as one of their reasonable causes. Now, how do we do it? How do we make this request for a reasonable cause penalty abatement? I'm glad you stuck around to find out. You will need Form 843 for penalty abatement. Now, as I mentioned in episode 11, you can request first-time penalty abatement in a hard way. This is the hard way. And as I mentioned earlier in this episode, reasonable cause is not something easy. Once you fill out Form 843, you are going to also be asked why you qualify for the reason that you've chosen. That statement, again, is going to have to be in writing. But you're not just sending your love letter, or I guess not your love letter. That's what they send us. You're not going to just send your request for the abatement on your letterhead or what have you. You need to make sure you also have Form 843 as well. Make sure that's filled out. Make sure the timing matches. You have that supporting documentation, and then it's a waiting game from there. So I know that was a lot. You probably absolutely understand why this was broken up into 2 episodes now. If you already felt overwhelmed, again, family, I don't just talk about this, I actually do it. You can reach out to my team at Bowens Tax Solutions. We will send you through a pre-training just to make sure that we are a good fit to work with each other. If we are, there's the application to work with us. I look forward to talking with you. But if you're not quite there, be sure that you go to the podcast website and to contact us and let me know any questions or concerns that you do have about this. So I know you may need some time to process, but be sure that you are following the podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you also share it. Help me on my mission as America's favorite EA to fill the tax literacy gap one taxpayer at a time. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'd like to thank Jim Ray Consulting Services for helping me get this message out to you. I hope you found the information helpful. Did you know 1 in 50 people have a tax problem? Please share this episode with your friends and family because you never know who may need help. Again, thanks for listening. Hey, just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It provides a framework and possible solutions for solving your tax problems, but it is not legally binding. Please consult your tax professional regarding your specific tax situation.